My name's David Fleming, and you're about to hear the pilot episode of our new Trainer podcast. While you're listening, if you happen to have any ideas or comments that would help us to improve future episodes, please reach out to me at dfleming1@gpstrategies.com. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to episode 1 of our Trainer podcast. This is something that we'll be doing on a regular basis to reach out to the Trainer Network to share ideas, to share best practices, to share information. And this pilot episode is going to be a special one because we're going to address a topic that's somewhat controversial. We're going to talk about auto stop start. Insert eye roll here. I'm sure you get eye rolls from your sales staff when that feature comes up. So we're going to address that feature. We're going to try to win over sales staff and get them to have a positive perception of this feature so that they can sell it better to customers. Now, our panel for this discussion, let's go ahead and introduce you to the members of the panel. We've got Tim Carter. We'll start off with you, Tim, if you want to just give your name, your territory, just a quick introduction on yourself.
Tim Carter. I'm Cadillac trainer. I'm in the Nashville market, and I was a technician in Chevy stores, and I trained techs for GM for about 6 years before I started the Cadillac trainer. I was part of the 2003 big expansion, so been through many changes, but hey, we're just Cadillac trainers now again, so back where we started.
Andrew, we'll move on to Andrew. Andrew, you mind introducing yourself real quick?
Yeah, it's Andrew Lawrence. I was I'm a trainer for 3 years, Buick GMC down in Indianapolis, Indiana. Pretty broad territory down here. I've been representing GM on the product side for about a total of 13 years now, 10 years at auto show with Buick, Pontiac, and GMC. So really enjoyed it. Looking forward to doing this podcast.
Awesome, thank you. And finally, I think we'll go back to Will. Will, you want to say a couple words?
Good morning, everybody. Will Doucette, Chevy trainer out of Savannah, Georgia, covering Georgia coast, North Florida, and South Carolina. Good morning. Happy to be here. Thank you.
All right. And my name is David Fleming. I am soon to be the Cadillac trainer for North Carolina, getting into Virginia just a little bit. But I've been with the company since June of 2012 and enjoyed every minute of it. So let's get onto business. We're going to talk about auto stop start. We're not going to focus on how the feature works. We're going to focus more on how to properly present it where you can win over your sales staff so they have a more positive perception of the feature, and of course better ways to present it to customers so that you can win them over as well. So starting off, why do you think auto stop start is becoming more and more prevalent? Because when you look at not just GM products, you look at all cars available in the US, we see auto stop start being integrated into more and more vehicles. So what do you think is the reasoning behind that? Why do you think we're seeing that more and more often? And I'll go off and kind of answer this first. I think it's tied mainly to our CAFE standards, and corporate average fuel economy standards are becoming more and more strict as time moves on. With corporate average fuel economy standards, we see that manufacturers are starting to adopt electric power steering. We see them starting to adopt these smaller displacement turbocharged engines. And now, of course, we see auto stop start. All of these technologies are being integrated so that we can move towards more efficient vehicles so that manufacturers can meet those CAFE standards. So CAFE standards, big reason why we have auto stop start. I think that one of the reasons that we see it on more and more vehicles, we should look at auto stop start on a larger scale. When you're trying to justify the existence of auto stop start, you should focus on more vehicles. When you talk about the fact that you're getting a 5 to 10% fuel economy gain on one vehicle, it doesn't sound like it's worth it. But when you focus on what auto stop start does on 100,000 vehicles or 500,000 vehicles, obviously the return is much greater. You'll see reduced CO2 emissions on a greater scale, and of course you'll see fuel economy on a greater scale. So I think when you're trying to justify the existence of auto stop start, look at it on a larger scale. That's why manufacturers are putting it on more and more vehicles, so the return is greater. Andrew, what do you think?
That's what I was just going to comment on, actually. They don't really look at it in a broader picture. Excuse me. They think of what's the benefit, feature function benefit. The benefit is you're going to get better fuel economy here, and like you said, and I couldn't agree with you more. Look at the broader picture. It's not just one vehicle. Eventually, it'll be all vehicles, which is just going to be a huge benefit for us. And it's not just fuel economy; it's environmental. Zero CO2 emissions is why we're at a stop, and then we lower CO2 emissions overall as well. Or zero emissions while we're stopped, and then we lower CO2 emissions overall. So, and that's in urban and mixed environments. So, it's helping them see the bigger picture moving forward. That's huge right now.
All right, good point. Good point. So we kind of know why it's becoming more and more prevalent. When it comes to dissatisfaction with the feature, I wanna talk about how our stores react when you even bring up the feature. Auto Stop Start has not received the warmest reception, and I kind of want to try to talk about why that is. So, in your past experience, all of you who have been in stores a lot more recently than I have, what type of reception do you get in your stores when you talk about Auto Stop Start?
It's like you said, it's kind of the eye roll, but just like any technology that's new in the vehicles, it's just I don't think they clearly understand it. One of the biggest things that I've noticed, and I refer back to displacement on demand. People didn't like that, and as soon as we changed the name to Active Fuel Management, they wanted to know more. Like, what's this new great technology? So it's just kind of funny. So as soon as we pulled it kind of away from the e-assist and the hybrid, and we just started calling it auto stop, they want to know more now. And but they still think of it as the e-assist. There's still this huge battery taking up this cargo space. So you just kind of have to take them away from that. And we're not eating up cargo capacity. Here's the benefits of it now, and helping them recognize that. Like we changed the name a little bit. But it's not certainly what it was. I mean, I always talk about the fact, what do people not like about the lacrosse, for instance, with the assist? And then it was the trunk space, right? The battery was back there. So moving past that, letting them know things have changed for the better, I think is the most important thing. But once we get past that, it's just focusing on relating it to them. How does it relate in real life? And I think every dealership I've gone to has a golf cart, or they've golfed before. So it's picking something that's relatable to them, and starting from there, really.
All right, good info. TC, what do you think?
Yeah, I've heard all kinds of funny stories. The vehicle's dead in the middle of the road, and we're going to get run over. The engine just died, and I've heard a lot of this stuff, and the salespeople are freaking out. And so one of the things that I like to stress is it's important to educate the customer before the test drive, make them understand, what the system is, feature, function, benefit, how does it work, why is it awesome, and prepare them in advance. Obviously, it doesn't start working right away, so you can even start your presentation at the beginning of the test drive if the vehicle's cold, because as we all know, you have to drive the car for 5 or 10 minutes for it to bring up to operating temperature and the cabin temperature and all the voltage and all the parameters. So and if they still kind of, like you said, they give you the eye roll, or, customers hate it and all that stuff, is, well, let's go for a ride, get the keys, I'll sit in the passenger seat, I'll talk you through it, and you'll see how smooth it is, because to me it really is smooth. We've done ride and drives in the past with BMWs, and their system is a lot rougher and not quite as smooth as the Cadillac system. So I like to go for a test drive with them, pack a car full of salespeople, and take off, and I just sit in the passenger seat and explain to them and talk to them the whole thing that they can use in a real live setting, and they can basically just regurgitate what I do with their customers. And you see how awesome the system is. As soon as you take your foot off the brake, the engine starts back up. By the time you get over to the gas pedal, the engine's already running. It's not really a big deal. I've got my 8,000 miles in my CT6. I've never turned it off. It doesn't bother me. You just have to have some seat time with it and get used to it, because it is a pretty awesome feature, like you guys said. You pick up the better emissions, you pick up the fuel economy, a lot of round town driving. You'd see some big benefits with that and some big gains in fuel economy if you're in an urban setting. And the whole big picture thing is awesome too. If somebody's thinks big, like you guys are saying, and knows how many cars are on the road. I always talk about that with the not releasing the hydrocarbons while you're fueling up. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but drive by any gas station every day and how many cars are sitting there with the gas cap off. So it's the same kind of thing with start-stop. How many cars are sitting idling right now in traffic or at a stoplight? So it's going to make a huge difference, and most of the cars are going to get this on the road in the next 2 or 3 years. So.
That's a good point, actually, talking about how, of course, we see it on a lot of vehicles as it sits right now, but we're going to see it on more and more as time progresses. So, that's a lot of the reason why we're talking about this currently. We want to address this so that we can present it better and hopefully it's received better. So, Tim, you bring up a couple good points. A lot of people don't like the shudder or the vibration that you get when the engine turns off and when it restarts. So that therein lies some of the disdain that a lot of people have for this feature. So we'll talk about now how I guess the systems have improved as time has gone on. Will, you want to take over?
Sure. So as Andrew mentioned, obviously this sort of started with the e-assist systems a few years ago. Then we added to all of the 2.5 liter Malibus and Impalas. And now, of course, we have it on your 1.5. So it's almost like the third generation of it. And, just to add to what Tim said, it's about awareness, and customers are always resistant to change. It was only 12, 13 years ago that seatbelt chimes really came into prominence, and you had customers all the time in service. Is there any way to turn this off? I can't stand that, but it's chiming at me until I put my seatbelt on. And now we don't think anything of that. That's how cars operate. And start-stop is going to be the same thing. A few years from now, we're going to be like, remember when cars stayed running while we were waiting at a stoplight, wasting fuel? So it's just like anything else. And of course, the system's continuing to evolve. And as it becomes more and more prevalent, acceptance will come along with that.
All right. Yeah, that's true. I heard someone liken it to leaving the water on while you're brushing your teeth. It's like, who does that anymore? And so yeah, that's a good point. Andrew, you wanna chime in on this?
Yeah, I think it's the one of the biggest things, as Tim said, as half the guys you'll ask at the dealership, how many of you have driven this vehicle? How many people like it? And they all say, it's terrible, we don't like it, the vehicle's dying, just as Tim said, they have this negative view on it. And then you say, all right, put your hands down. You say, how many people have driven one of the newer vehicles with auto stop? And none of them raise their hands. So I think that's the funny thing. It's just something that they don't clearly understand. And how can you not like something you've never tried? So I think that's huge. We really need to get them behind the vehicle, and doing drives during the training is a great idea.
All right. So I want to move on to kind of a new question. We're focusing on why people don't like this feature. We talked about the shudder that occurs when the engine cuts off and when it turns back on. And when I say shudder, I'm talking about auto stop start systems in general. You're always going to get some kind of a vibration whenever the engine turns off and whenever it starts back up. I think one of the ways to overcome that, just make sure the customer knows that we've taken measures with our auto stop start systems, and depending on what GM product you're talking about, we do it in different ways, but we restart the engine in a fraction of the time that it takes to start the engine from cold. So we are restarting it very quickly, and that fast restart is going to reduce the amount of vibration that we get whenever the engine is restarting for auto stop start. So make sure they know that we have integrated tech that does that. But what are some of the other things that customers do not like about this feature?
I think the idea of when you get to a stoplight on a 94-degree day, and if they have their AC off, the vehicle will shut down, but they'll notice that the air is getting warmer. So they'll kick the AC on, they'll kick the vehicle back on. So dealing with the HVAC controls and how it works at a stop is something that they're having to get used to. Something I really focus on in the dealers is HVAC controls. When it's cold outside, you'll have the heat on high. When it's hot outside, you'll have the cold on high, and that's going to affect how auto stop functions for you.
That's a good point. You can always manipulate the HVAC controls, and that can restart the engine if you're not happy with how the car is coping with being stopped at a red light on a hot day. So good point there. So I think it's important that customers know that we have tech, or not tech, but we have our auto stop start systems taking a lot of things into account before they do turn the engine off or when they're deciding to restart the engine. So good point there. Will, you want to add to that?
Well, you had spoke to the speed at which it restarts. A lot of feedback I get is that they feel it's unsafe. I don't know why I don't know why they're suspecting that they're going to need to, mash the throttle in order to prevent an accident from a standstill. But that's also something I've heard. But as you mentioned, of course, we're restarting the engine basically is quicker than the customer can move their foot from the brake pedal to the accelerator. So
exactly. The only way you'll ever catch the engine before it is restarted is if you're left foot braking and you're trying to get a good jump off the line. If that's the case, one of the things I like to share is you can always modulate brake pressure. You don't actually have to take your foot completely off the brake to get the engine to restart. If you release a little bit of brake pressure to keep enough pedal engaged to keep the car stopped, then it will restart the engine so that you have your gas pedal there. That way, if you need to brake boost your ATS 2-liter turbo or something to race a C-Class or a 3 Series off the line, you can do that, right? So, all right. So next thing I want to focus on, because we've talked about why people don't like it. Actually, one more thing about why people don't like it, and this will kind of tie into things that we can do to better present this. One of the big things is when customers experience this feature for the first time, they've never experienced it in the past. When they experience it for the first time, it's one of those things where if you did not say anything about it, if you did not prep the customer for it, then it can come off as a feature that's perceived as very negative, because their first inclination is the car died on me. What's wrong with this vehicle? And if a customer has that perception, it's very hard for a salesperson to overcome that or to come back from that. So those are the things that cause people to dislike this feature. Not having experienced it before, the shudder that takes place when it turns off and restarts. So keeping those in mind, we'll talk about things that we can do to address those when we're presenting to salespeople or when we're presenting to customers. So we'll address that shortly. The next thing I want to talk about, because we have representatives from all divisions here, we've got people from Cadillac, from Chevy, from Buick GMC. The reason why I wanted you all in here, the reason why we chose you for this panel discussion is because we want to get a little input on how the auto stop start operation differentiates. Now, it's my understanding, and Will and Andrew, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Auto stop start is not something that you can deactivate. There's not a push button option to turn off auto stop start on any of the vehicles that currently have it in your respective divisions. So am I correct in saying that, Will and Andrew?
On Chevrolet, yes, there is no way to completely disable auto stop start.
Okay, Andrew, on your side, BG?
No, there's no way, but it's important to note, although the systems do work relatively the same in something like the Encore, and this may be the same as Chevy, you have 3 different AC settings. You have the comfort, the eco, and the off. Now in the new vehicles like the Envision, for instance, and the just on and off. So some things have changed, some things are the same and some things have changed when it comes to the controlling of the AC, but no, there is no way to shut it off. There's no off button.
Same on the Chevrolet side. So we have the 3 AC modes. In fact, on Malibu, that's well. Anyway, it's regardless of whether or not the vehicle has automatic climate control, it does have a 3rd AC mode, which would be comfort oriented, which will use auto stop start less.
Okay, so TC, you and I can kind of talk about this because this is going to be big for the Cadillac trainers. As far as auto stop start goes, we have it on a few of our products. We have it on ATS, we have it on CTS, we also have it on the new CT6. And the commonality between how we've integrated it into those cars is that it does have a deactivation switch. We can turn off auto stop start. Now, how do you present that in your stores when you're training on auto stop start, Tim?
Well, like I said earlier, I go through the benefits and I tell them, you should prep the customer up front, make sure that they understand how the system works, so they're not, like you guys said, they're not freaked out and think that the engine just died and they're in the middle of traffic and all that stuff. I've heard that story way too many times. But I go through all that. And then I mention if I say, CTS, ATS, and CT6, like you said, they do have a button, but the button only disables it for that ignition cycle. So you really got to be a hater. I mean, you've got to get in and start the car and push that button every single time to disable it in those three vehicles to turn it off, turn the feature off. As you know, XT5 does not have a button. There's been, heartburn over that. So that's kind of how I go about it. I say even if you wanted to turn it off on the three vehicles that have a button, it's just for that ignition cycle. I don't think very many people are actually going to get in and do that every single time they get in the car. So you might as well just explain the benefits of the feature, tell them how awesome it is, show them on the test drive how smooth it is, and if if you do a lot of round town driving, it's going to save you a lot of fuel, and also obviously the benefits with the emissions too. So that's kind of how I go about it. And then, like I said, if you got a lot of people that have never really experienced it, I just say, hey, let's go for a ride.
Good points. So here's my thought on the deactivation switch, and I didn't bring up this point before. XT5, which is our most recent addition to the lineup, it has auto stop start, but it does not have an off switch. And a lot of people are up in arms about that because every other vehicle we have this feature on, you can turn it off, at least for that ignition cycle. So here's my thinking. As we see auto stop start introduced on more and more vehicles, it's going to be important to play up the benefits of auto stop start. Try selling auto stop start first before you mention the fact that you can turn it off. The reason why I don't think that relying on the deactivation switch as a crutch when you sell that feature, it may not always be there. We've already got XT5 and there's no deactivation switch. And maybe in the future, I haven't heard anything, this is purely speculation, but it could be that in the future we don't have a deactivation switch for our auto stop start systems on the Cadillac side of the house. So sell the feature first, and then if the customer still dislikes it, then you have the ability to turn it off if you must. So that's kind of my thinking on the deactivation switch for the auto stop start. And yes, it is worth pointing out, Will makes a good point in the chat box. He's talking about how other manufacturers do the same thing. They have a deactivation switch. When we talk about competitors for Cadillac, BMW, Mercedes, they have a deactivation for auto stop start, but it's only for that ignition cycle. Let's see, next thing I want to talk about is we know why the salespeople and the customers don't like it. How do we change their perspective? How do we win them over? What are some of the ways that we can present auto stop start that it will be positively received rather than perceived as a negative? Anyone want to take this one?
Saving fuel.
Okay.
When the engine shuts off and you see that tack needle go to the auto stop start position, then you're saving gas.
Yep. So to make that a little more dramatic, have any of you worked the numbers to see how much fuel you save? I mean, I think we're quoted as saying it's between 5 and 10% in urban environments. If you take something like that and work it up over the 3 to 5 years of a lease or the average ownership of a vehicle, if you work average mileage and average ownership time, I mean, you can save enough fuel to drive from New York to LA and then have some spending money on the side. So, if you take the numbers and make it a little more dramatic, I think that, the point Will's making could be something that helps it to be positively received. What else?
I was just going to add, we've all bought vehicles before, and we've been sitting across as they're crunching numbers, and I think the best thing that a sales consultant can say to a future customer is, hey, we're going to save you money. And that always is well received. Because of this technology that's implemented into this vehicle, we're going to save you money, and not just in the short term, but in the long term. So it's something that all customers like to hear. So that's kind of the message that I help them focus on.
TC said something a few minutes ago, making sure that the customer knows about this feature up front. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that you can do. Do not let this feature catch the driver off guard. If that happens, like I said a few minutes ago, you are setting a precedent that's hard to come back from. They think that the engine died. They want to know what's wrong with the vehicle, when in fact nothing's wrong with it. It was designed to do that. So as you're talking about auto stop start, make sure you use the correct terminology. I like to say that the engine turns off. It does not shut down. It does not die. It turns off or deactivate. So just make sure you're presenting this in as positive a light as you can. And then the other thing is, aside from telling them about it beforehand, make sure, like Tim said, he goes on test drives with sales professionals. And he talks them through it as it's happening. If you can be there as a sales professional for your customer as that auto stop start event is happening, I think that it's going to work out better, because you can talk them through the feature as they're experiencing it and reinforce the benefits of it, so that they have a more deeper appreciation for what it's accomplishing, rather than disliking the feature. Anyone have anything else?
Fuel economy, not so much on the Cadillac side, but on Chevrolet, I mean, it's a huge motivating factor for purchase. That's what all of the feedback and the focus groups, it's in the top 3 motivating factors for purchase. So if they're there saying that fuel economy is important, then stop start is a benefit.
Okay, good point. Yeah, and I don't know that I would say that it's not so much a benefit on the Cadillac side, although
it's just not as much of a motivating factor for purchase. Sure.
Fuel economy definitely takes a couple steps down to make way for luxury and convenience. But yeah,
how about performance, Dave?
And that. That's true. Good point. So anything else? No. So here's what I want to do now. I want to come up with just your number one takeaway from this. If you have anything that you could say to the other trainers, or something that you say on a regular basis to sales professionals while you're doing training in your stores that you think really hammers home the point of auto stop start, the benefit of auto stop start, the thing that you think is the most important takeaway from our conversation today. And I'll say first off, Mine is, as we talked about before, thinking about auto stop start on a larger scale when you try to justify the existence of it. Because whenever it's brought up to salespeople, they don't like it because their customers don't like it, and they keep on asking us why it's on more and more vehicles, even though we're getting such strong pushback from customers. And the reason is it's those CAFE standards. So the more vehicles they have auto stop start on, the greater the fuel economy return. So that's why we see manufacturers putting it on more and more cars. I think that TC, you read a report that was saying that GM vehicles, how many GM vehicles were supposed to have auto stop start by 2020?
It was the majority of them, wasn't it? I don't recall.
I think it was like 90% or something like that.
Yeah.
We'll have to look that up. But the majority of GM vehicles by 2020 will have auto stop start technology. This is definitely something that we should be addressing now, because down the road it's just going to be more and more prevalent. Will, you want to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, this is not going away. So in reality, we're actually ahead of the curve on this. So our systems, hopefully this is more of a reassurance for our sales professionals than our customers necessarily. But by adding this now and improving our CAFE in the present, in a few years when everyone has this, we're ahead of the curve. Our systems will have been in the real world, being used and evolving, whereas other companies will be playing catch up.
How long have we had auto stop start? I'm guessing the Malibu would have been the first with it?
Yeah, for non-e-assist, it's definitely the Malibu 2.5.
Gotcha.
14, I believe, because I think we used it 2.5 and 13, but it didn't have auto stop start, if I remember correctly.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, so we've got a few years experience with this technology. The longer we've had the system, the more refined it becomes. It's kind of funny. I've heard people say that the auto stop start system in the first Malibus that had it is a lot smoother than what a lot of German manufacturers, German luxury manufacturers, are putting in their cars. So that's a good point. Anything else, TC? You got your number one point that you want to share with everyone? Your number one takeaway?
Yeah, my number one takeaway is probably that I always stress to everyone to make sure to tell the customer up front and explain the feature to them up front so it's not a surprise on the test drive. Like you said, if they think that the engine died and it's just not a normal operation where the engine is turning on and off, then it's a real negative thing really quick. So I always stress that. But to piggyback a little bit onto what Will was getting into there with reliability and that kind of thing, for those of you that have been around a while and you remember going out to Milford Proving Grounds years ago, that was a really cool trip. And I remember one of the things that the guy told us is that all the GM powertrain systems are all tested at 250,000 miles. So before the first car hit the dealership with whatever new engine or new system like this, it's been tested and tested and tested out at Milford. And then now you're talking about on top of that, you've put it in customers' hands and let them abuse it on the streets. And so we've really got some great systems that have been foolproof and tested for a long time by the time it's been out for 2 or 3 years or whatever you guys are talking about, however many years on Chevys. And it's a new thing to Cadillac, but you guys have had it for a while, I guess. So
I would just add the biggest takeaway for me is make believers out of your sales consultants. Again, a lot of them, you go in there, you ask them if they like it, and they'll say no, they can't stand it. And then if you ask them if they've driven it, they will tell you no. So, how can they sell something that they don't believe in? So get them behind the wheel of the vehicle during the trainings. Let them see that it's not what it was in the past, especially on the BG side of things with the old e-assist with the lacrosse and Regals. Things have come a long way. We're not eating up cargo capacity anymore. And then focus on the benefits for the customers. I completely agree. Let's let them know what the technology is going to do prior to the test drive. I think that's very important. But love it, own it, and let them know how much money they're going to save in the long run with it.
That is a killer point, actually. That's obviously, if the salesperson has a negative perspective or perception of the feature, then they're not going to be able to effectively sell it. So we've got to win them over before we can start winning the customers over. I like that. That's a very good point. So I guess with that, we're going to bring this to a close. I appreciate you all taking the time to jump on this call with me and record this, and we'll go ahead and wrap things up. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back right after this. That's going to do it for the first episode of our Trainer Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you were able to glean something useful from it. I want to thank Andrew Lawrence, Tim Carter, and Will Doucette for calling in and being a part of our pilot episode. If you have any comments or any feedback that will help us improve future episodes, or if you have ideas for topics for future episodes, please reach out to me at dfleming1@gpstrategies.com. Until next time.